Spence, you got the old Evernest behind you there?
The background?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could put up a new one.
You can do whatever you want.
Try not to be distracting.
Matthew, you look like you're climbing the Himalayas over there. What
That's
the?
right. I have Mount Evernest behind me.
I love it. And I'm just in my office.
You're great. I will try to zoom in and see what people have on their shelf.
I'm reading the Blue Ocean Strategy right now.
Nice. I started that one time and just really struggled with it.
Same here. I've picked it up and then I'm like, oh, there's a Jack Reacher book. I just start reading. I'm like, I don't really shouldn't be reading like fiction, but yeah,
Right.
attention all that much.
All right. We'll give some folks some more time to come in here and then we'll kick it off.
Why don't we go ahead and kick it off? Some people probably don't
Have heard
right
this
on
before?
time and don't join on time just because they don't want to hear your announcement.
All right, good. All right, I really only have two slides here to talk through, and that's just our podcast.
You
If you,
forgot to ask where everyone's from.
I did. I usually, there you go. Thanks, McKenna, for reminding everybody. And so, everybody, if you haven't listened to our podcast, the Evernest Property Management Show, Matthew and I try to get an episode out every week. If we don't get it out, it's possibly because one of us is out of town. But we just recorded one yesterday morning, so it'll be up next Monday. But we'd love for you to be listeners, subscribers, and if you like it, leave us a review. If you don't like it, just keep it to yourself. That's probably the best thing to do. But so we have that, and then Matthew, you want to cover this, or you want me to cover this?
I'm happy to do it. So one of the things we often get asked, you're in the business of property management, and why are you so helpful? What trying to be so helpful? And so a few things here. Number one is actually even before this, when I first got started, there were a lot of helpful people to me. And I feel like a little bit personally is that I owe it back to the whole industry, right? I was a member of NARPM, which is the National Association of Residential Property Managers. And I had people that were investing in Evernest when it was first getting started. And so I feel a obligation to absolutely give back. The second thing, which is on this slide, is we're very passionate when we talk about our core focus. If you follow EOS or what Simon Sinek would say is our why, we're very focused on developing people personally and professionally. And so Spencer and I, as weird as we are, actually enjoy getting on here and getting to help people and add value to your business. Look, it was a tough road for us to get to where we are today. And so anytime we can help shortcut some of that, we want to do that. The third thing or the second thing on this slide is that, I think it benefits all of us to have a better property management industry. This industry is becoming a little more, we call it institutionalized, and that sounds very sterile, but it's becoming more sophisticated. That actually is a net benefit to all of our clients. And anything we can do to continue to professionalize the business is going to be a net benefit to those of us who want to get better. It's not going to be a benefit to somebody who's not trying to get constantly better as a property manager. But for those of us that are trying to get better and provide a better product to our customers, our clients, then we want to do that. And then the completely purely selfish reason, and some would say that's probably the real reason, but I can promise you the first two, or really first three, were accurate as well. But we do buy businesses. And so, if you ever get down the road, one of the things we often joke was it would be easier for somebody to build a business from 100 homes to 1,000 homes and us to buy them, or 1,000 to 10,000 and us to buy them, that listened to us, that implemented a lot of same things we were implementing, that saw the world the same way. It would be easier to buy that business at 1,000 homes than it would be to buy 10 of those at 100 homes. And we want, when you one day decide to retire or whatever, and you want to sell your business, we want to be on the list that you call and try to build some trust by doing these types of things.
Awesome. All right, last one is just our guest.
Yeah, so
Pete?
Pete Newbig is a good friend. Pete and I have known each other for a number of years. We've both kind of been in the property management circle. Pete owned a property management company in Texas. He sold that business, not to Evernest, but sold it to somebody else. And we don't hold that against him, but sold it to somebody else. He worked for that national brand for a while and then decided to start essentially exactly what our subject is today. It is a brand called VPM Solutions who helps property managers with what we call remote team members, or we call them international team members, essentially remote staff. And so, since we're talking ITMs, we're excited to have you on, Pete, since you're a ITM or a RTM expert. So, welcome.
Yeah,
Thank you
Pete.
so much for having me. And I'll do one shameless plug here. If you are looking for yet another podcast, NARPM has their own podcast. They have 2 episodes a month, and yours truly is the host. Very similar to Matthew. I too like giving back, and I've been helping people. I've gotten a lot of help all along the way from a lot of people. And so it's like one of the core values of NARPM. You just help people.
Yeah,
I still do that, and I give back through the podcast. So
that's great. Appreciate you doing that. And I've actually been a guest on that. So
you have.
you can start with mine, everybody.
All right, Pete.
Or not. Maybe it's more appealing not to start with mine.
So what I'd like to do is, because both of you have kind of your own stories of how you started the journey with what we call international team members. So we shorten it for ITM. We used to call our team remote team members, but then so many people started being remote, especially during COVID. We're like, hey, remote team members are everywhere here in the US, but we were specifically talking about our international team members. But would like to hear, Pete, your story into how you transitioned out of the property management business and into this staffing company. What was that journey like?
Yeah. When I ran my PM firm, we were around 1,000 single family homes. We were in 3 markets. We were all in Texas: Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth. And what was happening with us, we were growing rapidly. And as we would grow, for us to be profitable, we had to almost stress the team out. So like it was just this seesaw. And what we found was every time somebody, a good person was ready to leave us because they were so stressed out, we would hire somebody and then profit margin would just dip. And then we'd have to stress the team out. Now we make profit. Now we're happy, right? The owners are happy, but everybody else isn't. Then we hire somebody else and we go back, dip right back down. So around 2015, I found, hey, if we hire remote team members back then, or ITMs, I can hire somebody at I could hire 2.5 people for one person in the United States. That's what it was back in 2015. I was hiring people from Mexico. Made sense for us because same time zone, and we're in Houston, where a lot of people speak Spanish. And what we found is once we hired these folks, and as people would leave us or I had poor performers, I'd replace them with 3 people. And what we found was once you have more people, you can get more tasks done, because with property management, tasks are like water, right? They just keep coming and they don't stop. And to help preserve my property managers and my good performing people in the States, it was imperative that I hired some people on the back end. When we were done with the training and getting all the team members siloed, we were departmental at the time. Once I got them kind of owning their own process, we basically had about 90% of all property management tasks were done by our remote staff or our international team members. What this did is this did a few things for my business. The first thing was it reduced churn, because Deb, I just see Deb right here. She just said tasks are like water. What happened with us is our churn rate went down. So I don't know if Evernest has seen this, but as you grow, a lot of times you're growing and you just can't service the customer, and it becomes front end, back end. And so we had a leaky bucket is what we called it. And so once we actually had the people in place, we were able to reduce the leaky bucket because we were able to get all the tasking done really quickly. The second thing that it did is it allowed me to actually increase salaries across the board because we were becoming more profitable. So my US team actually benefited from this. And at first they were pretty resistant because they thought they were going to lose their job. And I was able to actually pay people more, and we were actually able to give better benefits. And then my property managers did not have to work 90-hour weeks. They went and worked these things called 40-hour weeks. They didn't have to work nights every night. They didn't have to work weekends. They were able to give better customer service. When you are running what I call it a reactionary business, what happens is, what's the first thing to go is communication. You might be doing some things, but your communication is poor. And then what happens is your owner client is calling you. And even if you have the answers, as soon as they pick up the phone and call you, they feel like they're managing you, they're managing the property through you, and that you're not being proactive in managing the property. So because we became proactive, we got more properties from owners. What we realized was some of our owners only gave us one home, but they had two other homes, right? That they would find somebody else. They ended up giving us those homes. But the other big thing was we were called Empire Property Management and Realty Services. No one realized that we did realty services. So we were not getting the buys and sales of properties. Once my property managers were not doing the $4 or $5 or $10 hour tasks, they were building those relationships. Now we were buying and selling more properties. If you buy a property for your owner client, you have more trust with them. And so if you do mess up on the onboarding, it doesn't really hurt. When somebody else buys that property for them, and then we tell them that the rent's only $2,000 when their agent told them it was $2,500, now we're the bad guys. And so it reduced a lot of that friction and increased our revenue. Overall, our salary requirements went down from about 56% of our revenue down to about 34% of our revenue. The salary stayed about the same, but it spread over more people. But because our churn rate went down and our revenue went up, the percentage of our payroll went down dramatically. And a dollar saved is a dollar earned, right? If I increase and I make a dollar and I'm running on a 20% profit margin, I only make 20 cents. But if I save a buck, I make a buck. And so that changed my business. It changed my life because I was actually making money with happier team members who weren't churning. My team wasn't churning either. And I was working the least amount I ever worked when I sold, which that's a whole other story in itself. Matthew, we can go over that on another podcast on the benefits and also the challenges of selling as a business leader.
Spencer's the one here that takes all the time off and gets all the freebies. So
Matthew works so I can take more time off.
yeah, I'd do that for him.
I think that's great. So it was like, so you were around 1,000 doors, single family.
980,
right,
yeah.
when you started this whole transition, when you started plugging leaky holes, you started adding the RTMs or ITMs.
Oh, I started doing that around 500 units.
Oh, around 500. And then you saw the growth happen as you were, okay.
Correct. Yeah. And so when I did sell, I was thinking, what can I do? And I came up with the concept of virtual team members really helped me with my business. How can I help other people? And the biggest challenge is people didn't know where to find them. And and if they did find somebody, they had to pay a bunch of money to get them to have somebody recruit for them. And so we took and it takes a long time. And so we took all of those and we said, okay, we're going to make it free. So you don't have to pay any money up front. We're going to make it fast so we're going to use technology to make it fast. And all you have to do is go to the site, and we have 35,000 people on the site looking for work. So we think we solved all three of those challenges.
That's incredible. So tell me a little bit about because I know Matthew and I were in a conference in Atlanta this past January, and there was a lot of people asking about remote team members, a lot of them who hadn't hired their first remote team member. So what are the mistakes that you have seen companies make in hiring remote team members?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I see the same mistakes of hiring, regardless if it's remote team members or it's somebody in the office. Right now, Lead Simple is a buzzword, right? At NARPM anyway, like automation's big. A couple of years ago, it was virtual assistants. Before that, it was some other shiny object. But Lead Simple is really bringing automation, and everybody is really working on their systems, their documenting systems, so that they don't have garbage in, garbage out. But one of the main systems that people don't have is a hiring system.
Yeah.
They don't have a process. And so some of the mistakes I see is the first one is core values. They don't have core values. If you don't have core values, you really don't know the type of person that you're looking in your organization. And if I don't know the type of person, how am I going to hire the right person? So I'm a big fan of Jim Collins' Good to Great, another book that's difficult to read, but I got through it. So I like how he uses the boat as an example, the bus. I use the boat as an example. The core values gets you on the boat. The second challenge that I see is they don't have really good job descriptions. I've seen job descriptions that say basically answer phones, all other duties assigned by management. And if you don't know and you don't have a detailed job description and you're not sure what that person should be doing, I can guarantee you they have no idea what they should be doing. And so that to me is like the instructions for the seat. So I'm on the boat, I got the core values. Now I have the instructions on the seat, right? So now I know how to operate the seat. The third thing that I see people do incorrectly is they don't use a personality profile. I'm a big fan of DISC. It's cheap and it's easy and it's served me well for 20 years. There's others out there, and I don't have a dog in a fight on which one you use, but when you build a job description, you should know the exact personality type for that job description. And then you should hire somebody that has that job description. I'll give you an example early on. If anybody knows DISC, it's DIS or C. An accountant is a C, it's a high C. And I interviewed this lady and she told me that she loves accounting and she tested out as a high I. She didn't love accounting. She loved the idea of getting out of her job to get into a new job. And you can fake it for a few months, but over time, you're just not going to do a very good job in a seat you're not required for. And so just go back. They don't have core values. So they don't know who they want. They don't have a good operating system for the chair. So they don't have a good job description. And they don't have the right person operating in that chair. Should they be the back end rower? Should they be the coxswain guy where they yell and row? So they don't have any of that. And then the last thing is they don't have KPIs. And I know it's a buzzword and everybody's, oh, but every role in your organization should have a key performance indicator. At least one. Everybody should have one number, if not three. If they have 11 numbers, like my property managers used to have, that's way too much. If everything's important, nothing's important. The KPI tells me, how do I row? So if you want to be successful in your hiring, you have to have all of these things laid out. You have to have a hiring system. The last piece of it is most people spend way too many hours interviewing people that they shouldn't be interviewing. What we do, I've been working on this for years because for whatever reason, it became a passion. I'm like, I want to get this down to about 4 hours of my time. And even 4 hours to me is too much. Now I have other people doing it. I just review I just do the last interview. The last person we hired was yesterday for VPM. We literally hired him for our company. I did one interview. It took me 45 minutes and that was but my team took about 3, 4 hours. But so what we do is we make sure they take the DISC test before I interview. So I don't interview, then have the DISC test. We make sure they take for ITMs specifically, they take an English test before we interview. If I have exams, we have free training on our platform. So I ask people to take that training. I have a property management 101 course that's 12 courses, 9 hours of content. If you want to work for me, you will take all those courses, you'll test out and you pass, and you have to get those certifications. What does that tell you about somebody who takes 9 hours of courses? It tells me that they're really interested in the job. It tells me that they really want to work, and it tells me that they'll do whatever it takes. They're going to be a great team member. So I make people go through red tape. And the negative of that is if you had 20 candidates, now I only have two. Awesome. Now you don't have to interview two people and you select, and I would hire both of them, to be quite honest, as long as I have a seat for both of them. So there's lots of little mistakes that people are making, but the biggest one is not having any kind of hiring philosophy or a hiring system.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Matthew, think about how to hear a little bit of your story into the ITM world, because it started for you back in India.
It started with you and me.
It started with us on a trip to India, but love to hear a little bit about that and just how at Evernest, kind of our philosophy, how it's grown.
Yeah, and then I'll jump into some mistakes that I jotted down too while Pete was talking. So the big story is Spencer used to run a not-for-profit that built freshwater wells in India. And Spencer and I knew each other from, those of you who don't know our story, we were both in the housing business before this. And then he got out and I pulled him back in later, but started a not-for-profit that was building freshwater wells in India and Africa. And we had a mutual friend who we originally met through that was on his board. And that friend talked to me one night into going to India. I think this was like
2009.
2009. I find myself over in India, flying literally halfway across the country to India. And
The
before we,
world, not the country.
what's that?
You said halfway around the country.
Oh
Halfway
yeah,
around the world.
the world, which shows you how, again, back to small thinking, but flew halfway around the world. Before we were set to meet Spencer in India, we actually, he had some work meetings. And so we had this series of work meetings. And those of you who've flown internationally, like literally when you fly halfway around the world, you are like the first day, you are so tired. And I can just remember sitting in these work meetings with this guy and just doing everything I could just to keep my eyes open. But like one of the things we started processing together, me and my friend, was he said he was in the financial world and he said, look, I can go hire a bunch of like Indians with finance degrees and accounting degrees, and I can get such a what he called at the time labor arbitrage, that I can have them working on things while I'm doing something else. Whereas in the States, it would cost me this, and in India, it would cost me this. And I started thinking about it through the lens of Evernest. What happens if I got a group of people together and they were doing property management tasks? Because to Pete's point, it's just a very task heavy business, as we all know. And some of those can be taught really easily, right? And so when I came back, I had this idea of basically, and I'd read some books like The 4 Hour Work Week and some of the books that there was one, The World is Flat, who's the guy whose name escapes me. And so what I started looking for is how do I contract some work out to India? And ironically, I was at a conference and ran into SI, Planet Synergy, a new Pi. And she's from India and lives in Atlanta. And so she had a remote staff that she had been in business for a couple of years. And so literally every Saturday I would come to the office and I would write a process that a news team would handle. And I just started handing one process at a time. And just like any flywheel, it starts really slow at first, but before you know it, her team started handling a lot of our processes, especially around accounting processes where they were highly repeatable. And so fast forward, Spencer and I were also at a conference about 5 or 6 years ago. And one of the challenges that we had with India was just the timing difference. Indian being on the other side of the world, their nights, our day, and vice versa. And so what we decided was see if we can start to hire in Mexico. And we did that and we hired a group of people. Some of those people are still with us. And that group in Mexico has since grown from initially about five. And we actually have pictures of us. One of the things that is really important to us, which I'll get into here in a minute, and about mistakes I see. One of the things that's really important to us is culture. We didn't want to just hire like the robots behind the scenes. We wanted to integrate this team into our culture. And so we actually I didn't go first. That's the great leader in me. I sent a couple of 20 somethings down there to hang out with these five team members. And so we have pictures. We go down there every year. And so we have pictures of just the organization growing. And today we have about 150 Mexican team members down in Mexico. And then we also, and in some other countries, Latin American countries, we also still use Anu and her team. And I bet I don't know, 10 to 15 team members there. And so it's been a really successful thing for us. The three things that I've seen, and like to bring it up to today, that are like mistakes that people make when they do this. The first one is what I talked about. One of the things that was very obvious to me when I got to India, and then obviously having been to Mexico a number of times, is to some degree or people have the tendency to forget that they're giving this work to people. And so you've got to not be so transactional. As property management company owners or property managers, if you start to be too transactional with your team, then they're not going to feel valued. And so just remembering that while the labor arbitrage is there, you're still dealing with a person on the other end. Sometimes we can forget that, especially as we send emails or Slacks, and we've got to make sure that we're not too transactional with our team. So our team sits in on all of our meetings. We go down there and spend time with them, build team. Like we're really doing everything we can to invest and grow that, grow them as just like they were if they were sitting here in the States. The second thing is exactly what Pete mentioned is just we have the same, generally the same. We have an English test and some other things, but generally the same process we use to hire an American or call it a domestic team member is what we would use to hire a remote staff. Having a great process. And then the third thing is also being cognizant of cultural differences. When you go to Mexico, there is a cultural difference. And so just being cognizant of how that may affect or how they may hear things versus, and some of the team members that work with us a long time, you build a lot of trust. And so they know how Matthew is, they know how Spencer is or Pete is. But when you first meet a lot of these people, they've always worked for a Mexican company and have a Mexican cultural or the Philippines. I know a number of people do that there. And so you have to be cognizant of how they're going to hear you and also build enough trust that you can interact with them a little more freely.
Yeah, I
Pete,
think that
you could add to that?
On the hiring system, no. On the management side of things, I think we can dive way more into that as well. Because what happens is people hire, whether it's domestic or remote, they sometimes they abdicate instead of delegate, and
Yeah.
they don't really spend a lot of time and train people, right? I want somebody who has property management experience. Great, I have a little bit of property management experience. Here you go. Here's everything. I need to dump all of this because we're
Yeah.
really, really busy.
Manage these properties.
Exactly, exactly. And so there's lots of mistakes that we as business owners make on the training side of things and definitely on the management side of things.
what do you think about though, like how do you help property management companies think about cultural fits as well? Evernest has a very strong culture. So even anyone that we hire in Mexico, they're going through a cultural interview. What do you see as how do you bridge that gap? And I'm not talking about from a Mexico to US culture. I'm talking about just the culture of the company.
Yeah, so I would love to know how Evernest does it because you guys are a big company. At Empire, I only had 35 people working for me. It's the smaller you are, the easier it is to create a
Yeah.
culture,
Yeah.
right? And you can extend that culture through Zoom if you have lots of Zoom calls. One of the ways that I do it is first when you interview and I'm the final interview, my interview is I try to scare the crap out of people so that they don't want to work for me. So I push my core values down their throat, my culture down their throat. I let them know all the stuff. We work hard, we work overtime, we work weekends. Like I tell them all the bad stuff. Then I go over their job description. If they still want to work for us, I know my team's already interviewed them. So I just say, okay, I'm looking for a good core. I'm looking for a good culture fit.
Yeah.
The way I keep it in front of everybody is every company meeting we have, it's on Zoom. And we go over the first slide is always our core values, except for in January, we go over like the vision of the company. But February through December, it's core values, and they know I will call them out. And I will reach out to somebody and I'll ask them, hey, what is the I in our WIP? We use acronyms. What's
Yeah.
I stand for? And then give me an example of I. And then I ask people, give me an example of somebody of a team member who has embodied that core value. So my team knows our core values. Last meeting we had, I think we went 10 minutes. I only got 10 people work for me. We went 10 minutes on different people and how they're using and how they're embodying the core values. So that's the way I keep, and we hire, fire, and we promote all based on core values. So that's the only way that I know how to do it. But I'd love to hear if there's other ways, like going down to Mexico. I guess you guys have a lot of people in one state. I got people in Philippines, Mexico, Colombia. I'm truly am international, but I'd love to hear more ideas.
I think
Yeah,
it helps. I think it helps that we do have a core group that's been with us a long time, and actually we have hiring managers living in Mexico hiring remote staff, so they're also on top of that, and they've been with us a while.
Yeah, you definitely have to have some culture champions down there and then have them be protectors of the culture. Spencer and I just talked about this. One of the hard things to do as you scale an organization is to use a Jim Collins, preserve the core and then stimulate progress. It's very hard to preserve the core because you start to get more and more people, especially as the more people start to outpace the people, the core group of people that have been here.
Right.
And so when we think about the core, preserving the core, what are the artifacts that we have at the organization that are, yeah, like if somebody came in and said, we're going to cut expenses, these would be to them some obvious things, but these are artifacts that we're not going to cut. And one of those, which we did cut, but, and then we've brought it back recently, is what we call used to be the 25K. We talked about that some on our podcast, now the 250K, because it was so core to who we were that it was an artifact that we needed to consistently do. And you're right, we do have a lot of people in one area of Mexico, but we started hiring all over Mexico, and we've always gone to that one area of Mexico. And last year we actually went to Mexico City. One of the things we realized was that there's every place in Mexico has flights to two cities. One is Cancun. We didn't quite pull that one off yet. We might do that this year, depending on how much success we have. But every city has a flight to Atlanta, Mexico City, every city in Mexico. So we met in Mexico City, and it was a fantastic time. I think of the 150 team members we had, call it 80 there, so a little more than half. We paid their way, basically gave them a stipend to show up, and so they got really creative. But when you, and I saw Brandon pop this in here, like when you spend time with your team, and if you have just a few, if you can figure out how to bring them to the US, that's very powerful thing to do as well. Get to see the home office, meet people, hang out with people in a setting that's not Zoom or not in the middle of a meeting. And so I think to put a fine bow on this, or a fine point or a bow, is look, you've got to treat your team like they're part of your team. We started out calling these teams virtual assistants, and we treated them like that. And then we started to warm up to the idea of them being more a part of the team. And that's what we found a lot of success is, bringing them along from being that very transactional virtual assistant to being a remote team member or an ITM.
Yeah, I'll just add two things to that. When you have strong core values and you push them down, everybody from your leadership team to your managers to your teams, your frontline team members, if they believe in those core values, that becomes an invisible manager, and people will get managed by those core values, right? So, for example, at Empire, we used to hit integrity, right? All of us talk about integrity, but I hired people that had integrity. All of a sudden, they're not changing the number on their KPI sheet. They're answering the phone at 5 o'clock. They're just guided by that. That's how they ran the business. Second point is you make a great point about if you don't have a lot of team members flying up to the US. So that's what VPM does right now. We don't have a brick and mortar. So we use NARPM National as a way to get everybody to the States. And we'll get a big Airbnb. We share the Airbnb with everybody. And then we add on to NARPM National either before or after. And we'll do some team building and dinners and all that stuff. And then some of them will go to the national conference. So a couple more ways to build that team mentality.
That's
Yeah,
great.
that's great. I love that. I'd love to hear any success stories that either one of you could share. Pete, it could be within your own company, or it could be clients that you have that you've placed ITMs with, and then Matthew from our team. Any success stories that you would highlight?
Yeah,
Good.
I have one that comes to mind off the top of my head. When we first had virtual assistants, and I'll use that word on purpose, we were giving them a task list and everybody would just do the task, right? Matthew had talked about very transactional. And we learned really quickly that these folks are college educated, bilingual, that they can do way more than we anticipated. And as we hit that 300, 400 door level, we really, our systems and our process were breaking. We went from portfolio to hybrid, and we were quickly going to departmental. And what we did is we ended up giving this girl, Jessica, the lease renewal process. And in the past, we had given her like, you only get pieces of each of the process. And we said, finally, we're like, we're going to go all in with these remote team members, and we're going to give them the process. So we hired Jessica to do lease renewal. We hired people to do maintenance coordinator, turn coordinator, utilities. Like they ran everything. And so my philosophy is the policy is made by the leadership team. Nobody changes the policy. You work around the policy. The process is made by, maybe it's made by me or the leadership team, but the process can be changed by the owner of the process. For whatever reason, we had decided that we're going to start our lease renewal process 60 days out. And Jessica's taught through the process. She's taught the process. And one of my first meetings with her, I think it was maybe like a month or two later, she had changed the process and she moved it 90 days out. And what I do is I try never to ask why questions, because when you ask why, all you're doing is you're putting somebody in a defensive mode, right? Blame, excuse, and denial. What I ask is what questions. So, Jessica, what made you decide to move it from 60 days to 90 days? And she then goes into this elaborate reason on why. At 60 days, I'm trying to reach the owner. And if the owner doesn't get back to me, and it was really time crunch, and we have to get this done. And it was like, this girl knows the process. She took complete ownership. When I gave her the lease renewals, now we all know we get paid on lease renewals, right? Whether it's the resident pays us, the owner pays us, or both in some cases. So that's money. When I gave her the lease renewals, her number, she had one KPI, and it was percentage of leases that were on a lease, or percentage of leases on month to month, however you want to look at it. And we're about 50%. I told you we were growing organization. Communication goes first. Obviously, in our case, lease renewals go second. We stopped doing lease renewals. And so we were like at maybe like 40, 50%. So I gave her KPI, and the KPI was like 45%. Then it was like 55%. Within 6 months, she got us at 97%.
Mm.
And so she not only took ownership, she completely took, and she hit the KPI, and we bonus based on KPI. So if you guys are not bonusing on KPI, I highly recommend you look into it and make the KPI hard, but achievable. If you meet the KPI, you get a firm handshake. And if you exceed the KPI, I was paying $100 per month on the KPI, but you had to hit all the KPIs, but you only had one or two of them. And so that's really my success story. She just owned that process. And it became one of our better processes in the company. It was run like clockwork.
Where is she now? You know?
Yeah, I had a couple of guys spin off from Mind, and they
Mhm.
started a business, and she was working with them last I heard. And I'm sorry about my dog. He's protecting me from the mailman.
You're good. All right, Matthew, what about you?
Yeah, we have a number. We have a number of success stories. I would highlight really four people, or really let's call it three people that come to mind that are like all three different success stories. One is Frank. Frank started out as a remote team member, basically doing communication, and he just kept taking on more and more responsibility to the point where by the end, he's been here 5 years, and he's basically taken on all of resident comm. He's basically managing that piece of our business and gone from completely frontline to managing a pretty decent sized team of people. The next one I would say is Paloma, who is run a bunch of different positions on the team, and she's running a big piece of our maintenance business now. Evernest has a pretty decent sized maintenance business, and I would say she's one of three most important people in our whole maintenance business. And then the third one would be Ari, who was really early innings at Evernest, and she's done a great job on the HR and recruiting side, just helping us with our Mexican team members and going through the hiring process with them, the onboarding process, being a sounding board and a question answer when our Mexican team has questions. So just done a fantastic job. And we've just given whether they live in Mexico or they live in Birmingham or any town, we've just given them more and more responsibility as they've earned it. And just because they live in Mexico doesn't mean we don't give them tons of responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's great. I was even thinking about, as I was thinking about success stories, I was thinking about Paloma. And I just remember the day that we decided. So we used to have a kind of a small group that was in a like a leadership development group, and it was really like a book club. And so we would all get around. We had one book, and we would come in every single week. We're tasked to read a chapter or two, and we would discuss it, talk about business ideas. And I just remember I probably was you, Matthew, was like, hey, why don't, like, what are we doing? We're training leaders, and we were really focused on people who were going to lead another market for us, move to a different state. We wanted to train them in Birmingham and send them out. But then Matthew was like, well, why aren't we just trying to develop everybody into a leader? We want everybody to turn into a leader. And so I remember in those early days, Paloma was one of the first ones in that meeting, because I think we may have been in Birmingham and Nashville at that time. And of course, again, she was on the front lines doing a lot of stuff, and now she's taken over huge responsibility in the maintenance department. So I would say, if you're listening and you can 100%, we put everybody through leadership development, because like Matthew said, the more responsibility they earn, the more we give them. And it's been fantastic.
I would just say, just because they're in Mexico, Philippines, or anything, it, they still want to be challenged. People don't want to just do a tick list and do that all day, every day. Now, there's obviously, if I'm a super high C, then yeah, okay, I get it. But for the most part, people want to inherently do a good job. They do want to be managed. They want to know what does success look like. That's why I think KPIs, having a job description, is important. And they want to be challenged, and they can grow in your organization. I have people in Mexico that supervised people in the States. So think about that. They were literally supervising people in the States.
Yeah, we do. We do as well. I'd be interested, Pete, to know if, and you deal with a lot of new people getting started, and I told how I got started, but if somebody said, I want to try this out, how would you, like, what's step one for getting started? Like a strategy?
Yeah, man, great question. I get this question a lot. Okay. The answer is it depends. So if I'm like, let's say I'm a portfolio manager, or I just have 100 properties or 50 properties, and I'm starting to feel that stressor, then what I tell people is do a time study for 2 weeks and determine all the things that you don't like to do, and then make a job description out of that. Chances are all the things you don't like to do are the same disc profile, right? So for me, I'm not a big guy in sales. I don't like a lot of high I stuff, right? I'm not going to make a lot of cold calls and things of that nature. And a lot of stuff that I don't like to do, just because I don't like to do it, doesn't mean that everybody else doesn't like to do it. And so I create a job description. So if you're smaller, that's the way I would do it. The second way is the way I did it. When you're a little bit bigger, go through your processes and determine either A, what are certain things that you want to give up in the process, or B, can you give the process away? Can you have somebody own the process? Or do you have to have you guys? You can't have one person run a process anymore, right? You can't have one person do lease renewals. I was able to do that with 1,000 doors, but if we would have gained 980 doors, if we would have gained another 500 doors, I would have needed a second person. But build the process out, and can you build a job description from that process? So those are the two main ways that I tell people to do it. I don't know if you guys do it a different way, if there's a third way, but I've seen a lot of success with those two ways.
So if I started, I may do something similar. Remember, I would come in on a Saturday, I would write a process, right? I would have this list of things, to your point, Pete, where I would just like, these are things that I can give away. And then I would come in on a Saturday and write a process. When things would stop, it would allow me time to write a process. Spencer and I have taught from the book EOS Life, the Delegate and Elevate exercise. It's a fantastic, it's also somewhere else, which it kind of escapes me where it is, but basically it's exactly what Pete was talking about, where what are the things that I can delegate to somebody else that kind of fit into the box of I don't like doing and I'm not even good at it, or I don't like doing and I may be good at it, and taking those things and giving those to folks. I think some of the times the issue we have is, and this is why I would do it on a Saturday, it's really hard to slow down
Hmm.
to write that process out or to write out the information because you're so busy. And so to some degree, you're either going to have to get there early, stay late, come in on a weekend when things slow down, and be very intentional about this. Because what I've found too is that things we probably should have automated, we basically took it from like a domestic team member and gave it to an international team member, and to some degrees it was like automated, but truthfully it could have been a technology solution. So being very clear on taking it from, call it $30 an hour, $50 an hour, to whatever, $10 to $15 an hour. And then, but if you could technology, that was one mistake we made, is we probably should have automated some of it with technology.
So I have a different philosophy. What happens is no one does take the time to slow down. And so what happens is they can never hire somebody, whether it's stateside or remote, because they feel like I need to have a process in place already. My feeling is hire the right person, and then you spend a lot of time with them the first couple of weeks, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. I have found that just about every job that we need to do on the back end for property management can be trained within 2 to 3 weeks. But you have to be diligent. It's got to be an hour each day. And so my philosophy on training is I do it over Zoom, I record it. So now you're listening to me the first time, then you're going to rewatch the video, and then you're going to start building the manual. So I have my new team, even if I have a manual, I have my new team members create the manual those first few weeks. And I have found that other than maintenance coordination, which is a beast, and it took me 90 days to train, and it almost killed me. But everything else took about 2 to 3 weeks of training on that specific process. And if you hear, somebody has to hear something 6 times before they get it. In that video training, they hear me, they watch the video, and they write it down. That's 3 ways right there. The next day, I don't ask them what they learned. I go back over the beginning of the process. And what took me an hour, the next day might take me 45 minutes. By day 4, it's taking me 10 minutes. And what I have found is when you do that as either the manager, supervisor, or business leader, you find lots of holes in your process. Example might be, oh, I don't really have a policy written down, or I don't even have a place where you can find that policy. Maybe we should have a policy manual. Maybe we should have that in Notion or whatever. Oh, I don't have a report for that. Oh, we can't report on that because we don't have a field for that. So when we were steamrolling our processes with our new people, I had just as many tasks as they did, by the way, because I'm like, oh, crud, I got to go build this or do this or build this policy. And we had a much better process. And then when they have the manual, they have something that they understand. They can regurgitate it, but more importantly, they know how to navigate that manual. I made a mistake I had a 110-page maintenance manual, Matthew, and I gave it to my maintenance people. None of them read it. None of them even knew how to get around it. Like it was,
Use it as a doorstop.
I used it for insomnia. It helped me fall asleep. So I'm a big fan of, because everybody says, I'm going to build a manual first, or I'm going to build this process first, and you never get around to it. 6 months later, now you even have more properties and more tasks, and you're like, I'm never going to get there. And then what happens is you hire somebody and you throw up over them, you abdicate and say, here you go. Kind of like we talked about earlier on.
So Pete, I would be curious, when you think about if somebody's getting started or maybe they're just fairly new to this, what type of tools does the company need or does the team member need to be successful?
Obviously, they're contractors, so they need internet speed and they need a computer with 2 screens. Like we can all agree on that. That's the basis.
What is the kind of like the minimum internet speed that you think?
I don't really care about upload, but
Yeah.
the download should be at least 20 meg. I would think 10 or 20 meg. Like it doesn't have to be awesome. It doesn't have to be 200 meg. But if you're running less than 20 meg, that's like dial up, right? They may not get the high speed that we have, but I would also, I just would look at, yeah, you need to have a minimum of at least 20, even call it 30 meg download speed. because everything we do is download, right? When I click on Appfolio or Property or whatever, it's all download. Upload is I'm going to upload video or something like that. And that could take a little bit longer, and we're okay with that. Unless, of course, their job is uploading videos, right? Then you need to
Right.
upload. And then a lot of people ask me, do I put them on our email? And then the answer is, yeah, you put them on your email, you put them on your Slack. If you're using that, you put them on your tools. And then if they need phone, I'm a big fan of Ring Central. That's what we use at VPM. I used something else. I used Crescendo when I was at Empire. It was great, but it was super costly. I think Ring Central's a little bit more economically friendly. And so I think those are the main things, right? Just so think about it as if I'm going to hire somebody in the States and I have a checklist for them, I would have the same thing in somebody that's remote, other than the computer should be like less than 10 years old, right? If somebody's rocking a 2002 like computer, like, okay, man, like we can't do business with you.
And that
One
that was
guy,
going to be my question. Like they need to bring a computer with them, right? They're an independent contractor. It's one of the tools. Just like if you were a maintenance person, you need to bring your own hammer.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep. I had one guy, I was about to hire him, and I found out the last minute he had an iPad. Can you imagine doing maintenance coordination on an iPad 8 years
No
ago?
way.
No.
No
No,
way.
no way. Yeah. So a mistake people make is they end up buying computers for these folks. And I just don't believe in that because, I mean, they can quit the next day and you can't get that computer back. And then some people say, well, they pay me back $50 a month. I'm like, great, you're going to get paid back in 2068. Great. If they don't have a good working equipment, they're not really ready to be a virtual team member or a remote team member.
And Pete, there's a number of groups just like yours, but talk about like the benefits of there's a lot what y'all do as a company to help facilitate this process.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different type of solutions out there, right? So solution number one is you find a online platform, Upwork, Fiverr come to mind, and you just search, you find somebody, interview them, and you hire them and pay them through the platform.
Which Evernest did for a long time. That was like
We
maybe
didn't
not the
find
first,
them there, but we paid them through there, right?
correct. We would always pay them through Upwork.
Yep. So we have that solution. And the way VPM differs is we are built for the property management space. So we have free training for people. You can search based on specific property management skill sets and things of that nature. So that's one solution. The other solution is I really don't have time to DIY it. And so I need a lot of hand holding. And so previously, the only solutions were you go find different companies, and I'll shout out like Anaquim is a good one, and Summit VA. There's a couple of good ones, and the difference there is that they have a company based in Mexico, Philippines, wherever country it is, and they charge you a bunch of money up front. Maybe it's a $1,500, $2,000, $3,000. And what they do is they'll go and find some people, give you here's three people, tell me which one you like, and they hire that person, and then they rent them out to you. And so if you don't want to manage your team, that's a great option. The negative of that is obviously the money up front, the length of time it takes to get them onboarded. And really the biggest one that I see is they're not direct hired. So they have two bosses. They have the boss from the company, and then they have the boss for you, the client. And so it's hard to push down your core values and your culture when you have two bosses. But they do some training up front and then they'll manage them for you. The other challenge is that it's country specific. With VPM, we combine those. So we have three options. We have the DIY, so you don't have to talk to anybody. Go create a profile, find some people, reach out to them, message them, invite them to a job, and hire them and pay them through the platform. The second one is we have what's called the white glove service, where we will guide you through the platform. If you're not really sure how to use it, we guide you through the platform and we guide you through our hiring system. So there's a little hand holding and you have some control and you can hire anybody. It's called a direct hire. So you pay them through the platform. It doesn't cost you any money for white glove or for DIY. And then you negotiate directly with the person that you're going to contract with. VPM doesn't set the market, sets the market. The way VPM makes money is we charge the remote team member 10% of their payment. So that's how we make money. And then we have a third option that we're rolling out. We're going to be a broker owner in 2 weeks. We're going to roll out what's called the Gold Glove. The Gold Glove is our answer to doing it for you. And so it's going to be, if you come, if you're going to be a broker owner and you're one of the first ones to sign up, we're going to, for the first 25 people, it'll be free. The Gold Glove will be free. And if you want to do the pre-broker owner, email me directly. I'll connect you and we'll put you on and we'll do it free for you. And what that is that basically the old recruiting system where you tell us what you want. We'll have an onboarding meeting with you. We will then use our platform to post, find the job for you. We'll do all of the testing that I told you what we do. We'll use our own internal way we hire people. We have a scorecard. It's 10 factors weighted differently. And we then basically grade all the people. And then anybody who's 80% or above, the cards will be green and you can review them. And we'll even do a self-interview so you can watch the interview. And then you can interview as many people as you like or not, or don't want to interview, and we can just hire them for you. And the cost is $1,500 for that. And then you pay them through the platform. And so we try to take all those challenges that people had. Is it country agnostic, country dependent versus country agnostic? We are in over 200 countries, but mainly the folks are going to be in Mexico, Central America, and the Philippines is what we're finding for people. We do have a few people in South Africa, Pakistan, India that get paid through the platform, but the main countries are Central America, Mexico, and the Philippines.
Now, Pete, I'm going to start hitting some rapid fire questions here.
Got it.
How do you ensure the security and confidentiality of property management companies' data when working with virtual employees or virtual team members, maybe not employees?
Yeah. So first thing I would recommend is you have cybersecurity. That insurance policy will cover that. But the way you do it is just like anything else. Make sure that one, run a background check. So through our platform, you can run a background check to make sure you got the right person. Hopefully your core values has integrity in them somewhere, right? So you have the right person. And then just make sure that you're not giving them access to things that they shouldn't have access to. So look at your property management software and just make sure that it's secured correctly. And then of course, look, if somebody's doing AR, don't let them do AP as well, right? There's some basic stuff that we shouldn't be allowing anybody, let alone remote team members, do.
All right. Next question is, what are some emerging trends in property management industry and how will virtual staffing adapt to some of those changes? I just think about some of the things like AI, right? How are y'all thinking about those types of technology changes and trends?
The one I'm thinking of right now a lot is the automation, because more and more people are going to automation. They're using automation. I don't know if a lot of people have adopted AI yet in property management other than ChatGPT to like really use it on the back end. To be honest with you, I'm not going to look at the AI until next year. I just have so many other things, and maybe I'm a laggard to it. Oh, I'm definitely a laggard to AI. But I look at automation, and it's at first I thought automation would replace the virtual team member. But what I'm finding is if I have automation, I still need people to do, I'll call it lower skilled work. And it actually is going to replace that lower skilled person in the US. You're still going to need somebody to manage and run the automations. And so I believe there's going to be actually a bigger need for virtual team members because you're going to either have really low level kind of stuff or real high level. And so I think your low level stuff, your remote team member can manage 200 homes instead of 100 homes with automation, and your property manager only gets the escalations, and they can actually do higher level work is the way I see it.
One pro tip here, we started using GPT because they can have great English, but even some of the teenagers and 20 something these days don't use punctuation correctly. We've started using GPT internally to help send better emails, right? Make this email better. And then we also have for years used Grammarly just to make sure that. So it's like a pro tip for everybody.
As far as AI, I don't know what that's going to bring. It's going to disrupt everything. I just don't know what that looks like yet.
Yeah, and it's not gonna be a huge wave that just destroys everything. One of the things that I'm excited about is it's gonna be a net benefit to all of us. Not sure exactly what that looks like, but AI is not going to go fix a toilet or show a house or do certain things that only people can do. I guess show a house, we've got some solutions for that. But I guess point being is we still have people living in homes and it's hard to disintermediate us from that. Leslie would like to know, what services are you using for doing background checks for overseas team members?
Yeah, we partnered with a company called Hire Image. And when you go through our application tracking system, it's one of the options there where you can run background screening. The positive is you can do background screening in any country you're in. The negative is it takes up to 2 weeks. So what I recommend is like when you put an option on a house, hire your remote team member, train them, don't give them access to any sensitive data until the background check comes in, and just anticipate that the background check's going to come in okay. And if it doesn't, then you say, hey, I'm not going to buy this house. And hey, I can't keep you on payroll. The nice thing about independent contractors is you can cancel the contract at any time.
I got a question for you. What is the, like, maybe not the craziest, but something you're like, oh, I never thought of having a remote team member do that. What is that for you? Like when you saw a client do that, what was that job? What did they do?
CFO was the big one.
Really? Tell me about that. That's awesome.
We're
Yeah,
looking for one. That is perfect.
yeah. They
What
were like,
about CMO? Do they have those?
I'm
That's
guessing
called
that's
Chat
Spencer's.
GPT.
I'm guessing that's yeah, they were looking for a certified public accountant and they ended up finding one that down in Mexico, interviewed them, and they became the CFO.
Makes total sense. Like numbers in Mexico are no different than numbers in here. So that's awesome.
I was going to ask you, what about any, maybe not BDM, but appointment setters? What about like client facing?
Funny you say BDM. I'm seeing more and more people use BDMs in remote. That's the latest trend. I'm a big fan of having the BDM in sales. I'm still old school. I mean, in the US, and then having a what I call inside sales developer. I don't know, terrible name, but I know. But basically, it's an assistant to the BDM,
Yeah, like an appointment setter or
an
whatever.
appointment setter. But so think about a BDM. They hate details, right? So what at Empire, the BDM, all they did was look at their calendar and go meeting to meeting. When they needed something like a PMA or they needed a comp, a CMA, anything like that, they would just send that. And they would just send it to the assistant. The assistant would knock it all out. And the assistant handled and did all the CRM stuff, right? Entering all the notes, all this stuff. So all my BDMs had to do was sell. That was it. And the inside salesperson or the assistant BDM would handle all of the dotting the I's, crossing the T's. But I'm hearing more and more people having PDMs. At VPM, we just hired our first sales developer. He's out of Colombia. So if you do get a call, it's going to be Alex, and he will call you, and he will be the guy that's telling you about VPM.
Melinda has an ITM. Melinda, where's your ITM calling from? Like, where does this person live? He live? If you can answer in the chat. But that's great. That's interesting. I've thought about that, and I've heard of some people doing that. I just didn't know if it was he's in Mexico City. Great. That's fantastic.
Looking ahead, what are some challenges of virtual staffing when you think about like the next 12 to 24 months? Pete, what do you think are big challenges?
I can't think of any off the top of my head as far as
Are we
far as
going to run out of people that speak English in Mexico?
no, but a challenge really could be a lot more people in the US. If you're I heard this stat from MSN.com like a year ago, and they said if you are doing your job remotely 40 hours a week, your job will be outsourced within the next 5 to 10 years, no matter what you do. So I think you're going to start seeing more and more people in the US have to elevate their knowledge about especially AI and IT. Like they're going to have to go into those type of jobs. The folks that are high school educated, I don't know if there's going to be a spot in the workplace for them because we just can't afford to hire them based on inflation.
What about inflation? Let's talk about wage inflation. Since I've been doing this, I started at X number of dollars and it's obviously creeped up, which is great. I'm glad for our team. It's the thing about the way labor arbitrage is, and I've spent time, they are living a really high quality upper middle income life in Mexico or the Philippines or whatever. So it's a positive for everybody. And I think don't want people to miss that. But what about wage inflation? Does this get to the point where it keeps creeping up? I know as more and more people do this, we've experienced this internally. We have ITMs that are going to work for some of the people that are maybe on this call. and going to work for more money, right? Are we going to get some wage creep to the point where it doesn't make sense in certain cases?
I think in certain cases, for sure. I'll tell we track on our platform. We have over 800 jobs that are paid through the platform right now. And we are seeing the wage increase, but not as much as I thought. So in 2021, it was like $9 an hour was the average. Mexico was about 9.20, Philippines about $7. In 2024, we're seeing Mexico a little over $10 now, like $10.13. I think I just sent this to Dan, by the way. I think it was like a shade over $10. So that's in 2 years. It went up a buck an hour. And the Philippines is still in the $7 range, is what we're seeing. So it is happening. What I think will happen is as more and more people use virtual assistants, the virtual assistants are going to have more experience, and more experience, no matter what you do, is going to have more money. So it might cost you, let's say, $15 for a maintenance coordinator with experience out of Mexico, right? However, that same person in the US with zero experience still might ask for 17, 18 bucks an hour, plus they need benefits and all that stuff. So it might close the gap, but you're going to get somebody who's college degree. You're going to get a much better candidate still. So yeah, you overpay. You might consider yourself overpaying, but he might have 3 years experience in maintenance coordination, where 3 years ago there was nobody with 3 years experience in maintenance coordination because they weren't even doing it yet.
We are feeling that right now, Pete. We're feeling that within our organization. Question, when I heard you talk about the Philippines versus Mexico, obviously there's also labor arbitrage there, right? From 10 down to 7. When I hear you say that, if I'm just thinking dollars and cents, I would go to the Philippines. But what are like the positives and negatives of hiring in both of those markets?
This is being recorded, and I don't want to paint a broad brush over any one country or type of people.
Yeah, don't do that.
But
Uh, what I have found is that, look, the people in the Philippines, they have an accent, right? And they just have an accent, and it's a South Indian accent. People in Central America have an accent, but it's a Hispanic accent. When you call a call center and somebody from the Philippines answers, what we're seeing is that your client automatically feels like you got pushed to a call center in a foreign land, which they did, but they feel that way, and they don't feel valued. When they call somebody and somebody from Central America answers the phone and they have that Hispanic accent, they just think they're calling somewhere in Texas or somewhere down the block.
Mhm.
So we are seeing that if you're going to be call facing, inbound call facing, not only do people that your clients would rather talk to somebody with a Hispanic accent or Spanish accent, but we're also seeing that, and again, this is where the broad brush comes in, that people in Mexico deal with diversity, or what's the word I'm looking for? They handle the phone call, they can bullshit better. I'm running out of words to say, but
Yeah, they understand like the nuances of dealing with
they do.
the different culture.
Right.
Because Mexico is so close to America, maybe they deal with the culture a little bit better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And with the Philippine folks, again, is because their culture, they're really good at following a set of instructions.
Mhm.
Really good at that, and they're really good like doing the same thing over and over again. So I'll give you an example, like maintenance coordination. You have to think on your feet. You have to be a little brash. You have to tell people no, right? We're finding that Central America is just a better fit for that particular role. Whereas with the Filipino maintenance coordinator, they say yes a lot, right? The resident wants something, they say yes, and they do it. And then that's the owner calls, what the hell? And so
Right.
they get pushed around a little bit more. Like they want to please, so they say yes a lot. And so,
Yeah.
and especially in maintenance, you got to learn how to say no sometimes.
Yeah. And that's
I
just kind
would,
of a cultural thing.
I would imagine if you have, let's just say a BDM from Mexico, but your office is in somewhere in the Northeast, it would be more of a people wouldn't necessarily think Texas, right? I would imagine, but if you're in Texas, it would be this person could be around the block or whatever. So I'm
Yeah, but
wondering,
in the Northeast, you got Puerto Rico, Dominicans.
gotcha. Yeah.
I grew up in the Bronx, man. So like when he calls, yeah, it's just somebody down in South Bronx or Manhattan.
Pete, this has been great. I'd like to close it with one last thing from you. What do you see? Like, where are you going to be? Where's VPM going to be in 5, 10 years? What's
Man,
your vision?
Yeah, 5 to 10 years. I hope we're servicing thousands and thousands of jobs and helping hundreds and hundreds of companies reducing their overall expenses and making small companies that are thin line profitable and making people like I feel like we're literally pulling people out of like poverty. Think about giving somebody $7 an hour in the Philippines is life changing for them. Like I have a guy work for me now. He's like going to buy a house now. It's just so we as business owners in the US can get a great benefit of reducing our cost and improving incredible amount of lives. That's what I see as far as like the high level thing. But honestly, I see us as the number one way, the number one go-to for all things property management. So I'm not just building a resource to find people. We're going to have the number one training in the industry. You're like, I love Norton to death, but I already outpaced their training. I have 30 training courses. I have vendors that are giving us training. Rentvine is going live next week. So I see, and also I also see there will be no need for recruiters. We're going to make this hiring process so simple and so precise that you won't need to spend any money, even on our Gold Glove service, that you'll be able to do this because of the training we have on the platform, because of the disc profile, the core value tool that we're going to build out. And so we're going to make it super simple to find great people.
Awesome. Man, I appreciate your time, Pete. Matthew, any last thing from you?
So, you can find Pete. I think we popped in his information, and if you have any questions, I know Pete will be happy to close the loop if you have any like questions that just deal with you and how you think about how an ITM or an RTM can help you.
All right, Pete, we'll see you in Florida in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thank you for the time. Thanks,
Yes.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.